Yes, yes, sir. I can hear
Okay,
you.
all right.
I see a familiar face, Ambassador. Good to see you and honor to you.
Good.
And it's
Nice
good
to see you too.
to
Yeah.
see my father
All right.
and Chris White, Mr. White. Good to meet you.
Okay, all right. So I guess these are familiar faces, right? All right.
Yes.
So yeah, we have probably like two more, but I think we can go ahead and start with today's program. I think we have time. We can do that, right? So those who doing the recording, right? Let's get right away and begin the program. All right. So hello and welcome to this edition of the Sankofa African webinar. My name is Benjamin Akwe. I'm your host today. It's Friday, February 16, 2024, 10 a.m. US Eastern Time, 5 p.m. South African Time, and 3 p.m. GMT in Ghana, where the program is being hosted. I take this opportunity to welcome all our viewers and listeners on the various social media programs or platforms, right? First of all, I have to apologize for last week's program. We were not able to bring the program to our listeners because we were waiting for Dr. Catherine Kelly of the African Center for Security Studies for her to join us, and she said she was traveling out of the country, out of town, so we couldn't have the program last week, Friday. Today's discussion is a continuation of what you call the Sankofa African series on the United States government strategy towards Africa, which was announced by the Biden administration in August 2022. Right, this time we'll be focusing our attention on the strategic objective of openness and open society in advanced pandemic recovery and economic opportunity. We are going to look at these strategic objectives through the prism of the African Union roadmap of silencing the guns by 2030. But in this case, we are going to focus our attention on the South African elections, right? So South Africans will be going to the polls this May. But the question in the minds of many Afro-optimists are what pragmatic steps has the ANC government taken, one, to address the issues and good governance, which goes to the heart of fighting political corruption, and two, tackling youth unemployment. The electorate in 2019 considered these two, including land reforms, as critical in their choices of candidates. So our panelists will take time to delve into these issues and how these issues may impact the elections in 2022 as a way of preventing conflict, right? So to help us delve into these issues of political corruption and youth unemployment, today we bring together scholars, professionals, policymakers, academic consultants, and experts across the diaspora and on the African continent to share their perspective on the topics. First of all, to inform and educate our listeners, right? And to our listeners and viewers on the various social media platforms around the world, this program is anchored on a myriad of perspectives. So there may be differences in terms of opinions from our guests based on their expertise, knowledge, and experiences. This difference does not necessarily mean that any perspective shared may be wrong or right, but it shows either probably a divergence or a convergence on how to address issues on the African continent. Right, so the Sankofa African webinar relies on what you call narratives. Narratives are an integral part of African societies, right? And we tend to utilize them based on research findings, policy positions, and realities prevailing in various African countries. The narratives help our panelists to present their perspectives independently, which may sometimes diverge from official government positions or organization policy positions. Today, to help us do justice to the topic today, we have Honorable Charles Ray, who was a former U.S. ambassador to Harare and currently trustee and chair of African program at Foreign Policy Research Institute, Washington, D.C. So, Honorable Charles, you are welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So, next, we have Colonel William White, who has been on the program before. He's a national security defense consultant, principal and CEO of the Indaba African Group. He's joining us from Pennsylvania. You are welcome again. This is the second time he's been on the program, so we take the opportunity to thank him for showing up again. Then we have Dr. Pio Nyando, who's a professor of African Studies and assistant director for the Center for African Studies at Howard University, joining us Phil, you are welcome. Phil happens to be a good friend of mine. We were at Harvard at the same time, so we've been friends for a long time. Phil, it's an opportunity to have you join us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with such an august panel, and it's hello to you and your viewers.
Sure, thank you very much. Then lastly, we have Sichaba Koapa, who is joining us from South Africa. He's the CEO and Director of International Research Affairs at Institute for Advanced Research, Johannesburg, South Africa. At the same time, he's also a professor at Wits University. Sichaba, you are welcome. Did I get your name right?
Must be load shedding. He disappeared.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think sometimes they have issues over there, right?
You got it right.
Right. He's going to join us, right? Then we'll have Lieutenant Adcocker, who will join us during the course of the program. He has been with us for a while, right? So before we take our take the opening remarks from our panelists, right? We just want to let our listeners know that this program is actually organized by Bell & Associates Consulting Limited and Budget IT Ghana. So we have a promotional video. We'll just play it to advertise our organizers. So Jude, if you are ready, can you play the promotional video for us? Jude. All right, thank you very much. Right, so I'm going to give each panelist a minute to do an opening welcome address. Right, starting with I think Lieutenant Adcocker has joined us. He's been with us. He was the former DOD Principal Director of African Policy, and he's been with this program for a long time. So let's start with you first, with Phil. Your 1 minute opening address before we delve into the issues today.
Okay. It's good to be here. It's quite an important year, obviously, because South Africa is one of those countries that is it may be viewed as quite integral to how the rest of the region in particular, and generally the rest of the continent, at least, from the equator onwards down, is viewed by the world and interacts with the world. So it may be so that sometimes South Africa has been viewed as kind of how South Africa interacts with the world. It augurs either well or badly for other countries. But also there are a lot of things that I've seen change, especially with the Lobito project that I'll be happy to talk about, that the dynamics that this introduces that diversify South Africa's hitherto kind of one-sided interaction with the world, because South Africa, the rest of the region is maturing in its analysis of South Africa, I would say. The South African hegemon, as others perhaps may have dreamt of, there's a challenge to this image of an all-empowering South Africa that is gonna just basically be the mother to the region. So that's it's nice to be here to discuss some of these things in specificity.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Kenneth White. Can we get your brief opening remarks before we proceed?
Benjamin Akwaba, welcome to everyone who's listening to the program. I know we'd appreciate that from Ghana.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Listen, everyone always likes to say that this is the most important election. We hear that all the time, particularly here in the United States. And clearly the elections this year across the world, particularly the United States and South Africa, will be consequential. This arguably is the most important election in the trajectory of South Africa since 1994's election. And it is a very important, potentially an inflection point for South Africa. After 30 years, the ruling party, which in my view has betrayed liberation, has outgrown his excuses, and a lot of voters in South Africa are frustrated. But will that translate into the ANC falling far enough down in national elections that they lose control? I believe that to be the case. I predicted that in November of 2021 after municipal elections. I said 38 to 42% was their best. Will they get there? I don't know. That could be challenging. But the electorate is fracturing into multiple smaller parties, lots of issues, load shedding, state ownership, parastatals, corruption across the board, crime off the charts. It's so heartbreaking to see such a great nation with such promise and such incredible human capital from all groups that is just languishing. This year will be pivotal. And even if an opposition coalition somehow wins, South Africa is not out of the woods because they have a bureaucracy staff with a lot of patronage hires. And we'll see what happens for the future. But it is a consequential year, both for South Africa and for the U.S. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go to Ambassador Charles Ray briefly.
Well, thank you for having me. And the two previous speakers have actually said most of what I had to say. I would agree that this is a very consequential election for South Africa, even more so because of the external challenge. That is, it's also an election year for the United States, and we are at an inflection point in our own evolution to democracy, which can have a huge impact on our interaction with countries like South Africa. But in terms of South Africa's election, what I focused on, what I have been focusing on, is the fact that ANC appears to be losing credibility with a significant electoral demographic in the country, and that is the youth, who account for some 40% of the electorate, who have been completely disaffected with the performance of the ANC in terms of job creation, corruption, and economic performance. And unless, and of course, it's actually too late for them to try and do anything to reverse that. In this election cycle, I think the outcome of the election is going to depend on how the various opposition parties are able to attract the disaffected youth to participate in the election. And that could create some interesting dynamics post-election as to how the South African government organizes itself to go forward. And thanks very much for having me. I look forward to any questions that come up.
All right, so let's go to Lieutenant Corker. I think Sichaba is having problems. So, Lieutenant, can you give us your brief opening remarks whilst we wait for Sichaba to come on board?
Yes, good morning, and thank you once again for allowing me to participate. Again, this is not the never representing the official position of the U.S. government, but as with the Sankofa series, kind of looking backward to move forward, I would offer that flavor to it. Part of my experience is that I studied South Africa in the mid 80s, if you will, and specifically the ANC, as I mentioned to you, and also at the time, they were, the liberation or freedom fighters, or at that time in the U.S. we were thinking of the budget. The budding terrorists, and so what category were these things falling into? I think that South Africa is at a great point as it evolves over time, and so to suspect that any political party would sustain power perpetually is unrealistic. And not only is it unrealistic, but I just don't think it's in the best interest of the country. I think to me, it's a positive thing that the youth are shaking up things. Maybe that the youth can break through the corruption and other things, and just inject new vitality, if you will, to the country. As Chris said, they have there's a great lot of human capital over there, so it's not because they're going to be lacking anything. It's just getting the right people behind to kind of move it forward in a positive and constructive direction. With that said, thank you for allowing me to join you, and I look forward to the conversation. Open.
All right, thank you very much. Right. So, like I said in our introduction, right, we use narratives, right, and we use a narrative to set up the discussion. So, I'm going to start with a narrative based on U.S.-South African relations on the ICJ genocidal case and its impact on AGOA and South Africa advanced pandemic recovery and economic opportunity. Right. So, we are all aware about what happened at the ICJ. Now, what people are not really aware of is a bill before the US Congress. So I just want to give a little bit background to that. On Friday, February 9, 2024, a bill was submitted to the United States Congress calling for a full review of US bilateral relationship with South Africa following the ICJ ruling that found it plausible that South Israel has committed acts of genocide against Gaza. The bipartisan bill, which was introduced by US Republican Congressman John James and Democratic Party Congressman Jerry McCoskey, would threaten South Africa prospects to benefit from the AGOA, which is due for renewal in September of 2024. The bill accuses the ANC of acting inconsistent with its publicly stated policy of non-alignment in international affairs. It states that the South African government has a history of siding with malign actors, including Hamas and the Russian Federation. The US Congress bills argues that the South African government's support for Hamas dates back to 1994, when the ANC first came to power, taking a hardline stance of consistently accusing Israel of practicing apartheid. The ANC and the South African government have, however, been known to have ties with the Palestinian Liberation Organization dating back to the former president, Nelson Mandela. So I want us to take a look at trade relations between the US and South Africa in terms of AGOA. So Jude, can you put up that table for us, for our viewers to take a look at? So this is a table which shows the trade relations between the United States and South Africa. You could see that from 2000, it was gradually increasing, right? All the way to probably like 2008 to 9, it came down and it went up again. In 2020, it was very high. Then during the COVID, it started coming down. And the US has what we call a recovery program as a way of trying to help South Africa get itself out of this quagmire, right? So my question to you first, based on the graph that we have seen, we've seen that in 2020, we reached the highest almost around 16, 17 billion, right? And if we see there was a trade balance, which was very good for South Africa. In 2021, it started coming down, 2022 because of COVID. So South Africa actually needs to recover and build up. Now, my question to you, let's come to you, Theo first. Is South African government, based on its history and identity, jeopardizing its bilateral AGOA relations with the US for its unwavering support for Israel on the international stage, or it's deflecting its own internal domestic challenges so as to win over anti-American voter sentiments in the upcoming elections?
Yes, I would say both. I would say you must understand South African, the African National Congress, the history of the South African National Congress is steeped in narrative. We're talking about narratives. These are liberation era, Cold War narratives where you speak left while you walk right. So and you speak revolutions, Soviet Union speak while you are actually living in quite a modern economy and promulgating a modern economic policy, as South Africa has actually done so since the inception of democracy. So this narrative, though, is important, especially during election time, where coalitions are fractured. And in the ANC, there are different, what we call churches. So there's going to be your communists, there's going to be your centrists, there's going to be your rightists. So depending on who each at any particular time, depending on whence their constituents are ensconced, an ANC president will often pander to that as a survival mechanism. So some of this talk might well be a way of surviving the election. In other words, you must galvanize the people you want to vote for during an election year. You must resort to this speak. And some of this speak involves liberation era coalitions, international coalitions. It involves romantic speak about Cuba, even though the economic relations are quite negligible. So we must be able to separate this, hopefully I've done so, between election talk and actually where the rubber hits the road.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Honorable Charles Ray. You know the region very, very well. Is it too risky? Because South Africa is trying to recover from the pandemic, right? So would you say that it was too risky on their part to do that, knowing very well that this is the action the U.S. was going to take? The U.S. was going to take the action of trying to take a look at AGUA and see its effect on South Africa as a way of probably punishing them for the action that they took in terms of the ICJ.
It's really difficult to say if it's too risky, because when you're looking at South Africa, from my perspective, and I tend to be at odds with some of the official Washington view, is that you have to remember that when you're looking at South Africa, the ANC, even though it's in the leadership position, doesn't necessarily represent the view of all segments of South Africa. The business community, for example, I like Piwo's comment of talking left and leaning right. The business community has always been much more pro-West than pro-Russia, because that's where the economic benefits are for them. This external, I mean, was it a risk? Yes, it was. But if you look at the history, ANC has been consistent throughout. I mean, ANC has been pro-PLO, pro-Palestinian, tended to be, leaning toward Russia, because let's face it, during apartheid, the Soviet Union supported ANC, and we designated them as a terrorist group and supported the apartheid government. And I think that from the external view, a lot of people here in the U.S., and let's not forget that we're in an election year, and there's a lot of pandering to certain groups in this country as well, and that has to be factored into how these things will actually play out. We sometimes forget that they've been consistent in the ANC has been very consistent in their views, and that they are not just, I think, talking to what the anti-West or anti-Western or anti-US factions, but they're talking, I think, to all those people who have mixed feelings about the West and about the US and where we stood during their fight on the continent for liberation. I mean, our record as a country, as a government, has not been that stellar when it comes to actually supporting a lot of these liberation movements. And then the Cold War, there was we put people into categories, those with us and those with the other side. And this has created, I think, an environment where those in the decision-making positions in the ANC, maybe they understood the risk, but are sticking to the principles that they've espoused since 1994. I mean, I've not seen a lot of difference in what the ANC says over the years. What I've seen is a difference in how we react to it, depending on the circumstances. And the big risk was they did it in an American election year, when we have as many people doing things to pander to certain demographics as they do. and that has to be factored in. I think, you know, if you look at it, whether they will actually pay a severe price for what they've done in terms of the ICJ thing, for example, certain subsequent actions on the part of the Israelis has started to create fractures even here in the U.S. I mean, in the U.S., we don't have a solid pro-Israeli government position. You have a lot of people who are beginning to back away. We support the right of Israel to survive, but that's not saying that we support their right to do anything at any time without restraint. So there's no simple answer to that. Was it a risk? Yes, it was a risk. Was it a risk that I think though they see it as a risk worth taking, and that can't be ignored.
All right, thank you very much. Right, before Chris, in 2022, during the U.S. African Summit, Secretary of State Blinken speaking on how trade is a pillar to realizing shared vision of prosperity by providing duty-free access to U.S. markets for more than 6,800 products, stated that AGOA is an example of how we can use trade as a force for good. Right. However, to maintain eligibility, countries must uphold values that are core to free and fair societies: the rule of law, labor rights, human rights, and intolerance of corruption. Any of these things does not apply in the South African case, right? South Africa is invoking the basic values in terms of human rights that the U.S. is a champion of when it comes to international relations or dealing with countries in the international community. Why is it that it is a problem for this particular administration, where South Africa has a history of fighting for human rights on the international stage? Why is that a problem to the administration, using their own values?
Well, that's a fair question. We should probably frame this by a couple of points. First off, South Africa doesn't have a reliable history of protecting human rights. They choose and select. South Africa did not join the Gambia's ICJ case against the Myanmar government in its genocide against the Rohingya, for instance. That's one example. South Africa was silent on Tigray and Ethiopia in the past recent years. It's silent on Sudan. It's been silent on a number of issues. It has been active in other areas, so I'm not going to beat up on South Africa that. And for those who know me, know that I have a deep affection for South Africa. I've spent 4.5 months there in the past year plus, all over the country, doing documentaries, meeting with people in all sectors of society, covering the BRICS convention, also covering the multi-party charter event that took place. But the point here, and I think Ambassador Ray could probably confirm this, the challenge with Africa is, regardless of the administration, Republican or Democrat, Africa is a tertiary thought for the U.S. government. It is not a priority. And that's unfortunate. 1.3 billion people. As an Africanist, it pains my heart that we've given Ukraine $170 billion, and we give the entire State Department $50 billion a year, and Africa gets maybe $9 billion in a good year. I'm not advocating giving money to people. My point is that that's a huge disparity in where our focus is, a country of 43 million people in Eastern Europe. But the question here about this is that, frankly, to be honest, AGOA is a generous gift to Africa. We should also make out the point that a lot of people, including Blinken, say it's a great program. I'm an advocate for AGOA. I think it's a brilliant way for folks to take advantage of getting duty-free access to the U.S. marketplace, provided they agree to a set of conditions that we think are reasonable. Our government does. However, it's not as profitable for many countries as it's made out to be by the U.S. government. South Africa is an exception. Now, South Africa-U.S. trade is about $20 billion a year right now, which is not significant for the U.S. It's a rounding error, but it's a significant figure for South Africa, and still makes the U.S. South Africa's second largest international trading partner after China. But the thing is that South Africa, with the mere introduction of expropriation without compensation into the parliament in 2018, abrogated its obligations under AGOA. Under AGOA, Section 104, a market-based economy that protects private property rights. South Africa's constitution already allows for expropriation with compensation, and the ANC's record on expropriating property and turning it over to other people has been very poor. to date. And that's unfortunate. There's no need for that. That mere introduction of that should have drawn attention from officials in Washington, and it did not. The whole issue with Lady R and all the things that are going on now with the ICJ, those are issues with the current administration. And that, as Ambassador Ray was, I believe, intimating, that plays out over administrations. The issue here is that AGOA is a gift. And the ANC has chosen to challenge that by taking action, which is in their interest, and that is their prerogative. But there are consequences, decisions, and I don't really think this legislation is going anywhere. I think it's just election year stuff. South Africa will remain in this. U.S. gets BMW parts to fix our BMWs from South Africa. We get wine from South Africa, and I think that's going to stay and continue. But in my view, South Africa's government should have been punished and removed from preferential treatment and duty-free access, which they don't grant to us, by the way. They don't grant us duty-free access to South Africa's marketplace. They, in fact, tried to impose 75% tariffs on chicken parts there when our chicken industry is much more productive. So I would argue that it's their choice, it's their prerogative, but choices have consequences.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lieutenant Adcock, what do you think this thing is going to, how do you think this is going to impact what? South Africa in terms of the ANC in the coming elections? Their stance in terms of ICJ, right? And its impact on AGOA. How do you think it's going to impact the elections?
I'm not sure that it will have much impact at all. I think that you and others kind of may take a more serious look at U.S. legislation and these types of trade partnerships much more intently than the ANC or anyone there. I'm not sure that this is going to be kind of have major impact on ANC considerations going forward. And likewise, even with the House resolution, I don't even know that kind of registered with them. As you know, not many people in the U.S. are they kind of came up on the radar unexpectedly, and so whether to the extent to which it has been disseminated or dispersed or routed around is yet to be seen. Regarding the election and the ANC and its downward spiral, I think that's just a different issue in and of itself. And I don't think that there is going to be, I don't know if anyone said previously that they are in fact in a downward spiral. And so time will tell in terms of the results. But I think all things considered, the ANC is in a major decline.
All right, so let me get back to you, Fiwo, right? Now, on November 2023, right, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, BLSA, Busi Mausi, writing in a bi-weekly newsletter that many more South Africans could benefit from AGOA. Apart from mainstream formal business sector, there are opportunities to enable entrepreneurs, including women-led businesses and small-sized enterprise, to benefit from AGOA. So they consider AGOA to be something which is very, very vital to their economy. Do you think that the U.S. decision, if the U.S. decision goes, if the bill goes through, this will not impact South Africa in any way, even though we know very well that the renewal of AGOA is going to be in September? Is it just a ploy or just to throw dust into people's eyes that the U.S. is trying to do something about South African position on the ICJ?
Yes, I'm going to do something academics rarely do and just speak straight. And I'm going to say my opinion, okay? Speak like a good Zulu boy. No, I actually don't think this bill will go through, okay? Because South Africa, I take students every summer to South Africa, American students. The most number of any American young sons and daughters that you find anywhere in Africa, anywhere outside Europe, mainly you find, or Asia, you find them in South Africa. South Africa is indispensable in all spheres to the United States. So no sane politician would actually shake this dynamic in such an important year of such an important country. And I looked actually, Congressman James's 10th district is in the suburbs of Detroit. You know what? What's the best-selling pickup truck right now in South Africa is the Ford Ranger. People are going viral, driving it in deserts, in sand dunes, and everything. So these are very important relations, and they are blossoming. But like all mature relations, like I compare South Africa to the relations between the US and France. We're not used to such relations with a third world country here in the US sometimes, of kind of a developing country that can talk back, but that is still friendly. Just think of France, especially during, the war in Iraq, and what the French foreign minister de Villepin used to say, how we even changed, some people wanted to change French fries to freedom fries. But here we are, all of us in Paris. So I beg to differ with the idea that there is a possibility that this will go through for the reasons I've just stated. And another thing is that we are in an epoch where human relations matter, okay? Where it just and they drive demand, and we're in an epoch in academia of cultural competency. We want as many of our students in America to understand Africans. To understand Africans, you must understand the Africans' past, the African sensitivities. And in South Africa, I'm not gonna lie, for better or for worse, race is still a very sensitive thing. So you will not find an American politician, and in fact, I should give people at the State Department much credit. They've been quite restrained in some of these kind of provocative actions. It shows that the adults in the room are speaking and are being listened to. Right, when South Africa made such very provocative, I told a colleague, I said, well, other countries could not say that, and then the rivers remain calm, and they did. So you asked a question about whether or, and I've answered it with a straight, I don't think so.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Ambassador Charles Ray, right? Chris enumerated a number of situations whereby South Africa did not get themselves involved. Why is it that Palestine is so important to South Africa in this situation?
Well, as I said, the Nelson Mandela, one of the first foreigners he met after being released from jail was Nasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat, and you have to look at the history. I mean, during apartheid, and there are a lot of people, including a few in this country, who look at the way the Israelis managed the occupied territories and their treatment of Palestinians as similar to the apartheid government's treatment of Black South Africans. So there's been this relationship between the ANC and the Palestinians that goes back beyond the memory of most bureaucrats in Washington. And so anyone who's surprised that the ANC or that ANC officials would be very pro-Palestinian is someone who's ignorant of the history, who hasn't seen. They have been consistently pro-Palestinian. Now, was it a mistake for them not to be a part of some of these other things? In retrospect, you could say yes, but in terms of what is important to them and what they have a cultural or historical affinity to, they go for the things that have always been part of their ideology and their history. And in terms of the U.S. response, and this, you can't delink them. I mean, sometimes our response is also historical. We are knee-jerk supportive of Israel, and I'm a very pro-Israel person. However, our politics sort of shapes how we respond in this country right now, especially in an election year. If you criticize anything Israel, you're considered anti-Semitic. It's like if you are against settlements in the occupied territory, you have people who will shy away from you, and it's illogical. It's irrational as all get out, because to say that you are anti-Jew or anti-Semitic because you oppose illegal settlements boggles the mind. It just defies rational thought. So there's that. I mean, I agree with Piwa that this legislation is going nowhere. I mean, this legislation is a bit of political theater in an election year at a time when our Congress is so dysfunctional, it can't even decide if it wants to keep a recently elected speaker. So, you know, that we could have a whole panel discussion on how the dysfunction of American politics intersects with the dysfunction of South African politics to create what is a flurry of attention that, as we get closer to the election, will be replaced by something else. I mean, we're talking about this current proposed legislation. There was proposed legislation also back last year. I don't remember if it was the ship incident or something that South Africa did in relation to Russia. There was another bit of proposed legislation to look at our relationship with South Africa, and there was a little flurry of news about it, and it just sort of faded from view. I would point out, for example, that this news about this current proposed legislation, I get news feeds every morning at about 5 o'clock from all the major American news outlets, and I also watch a compendium online of streaming news. Nothing in any of the major news American media outlets talks about this legislation, which tells you something right there. I mean, it's playing outside of the U.S. Most people here have no idea what we're talking about if we were to bring it up. So I think that this legislation is a lot of smoke and probably no fire. You have to remember the legislative process. It gets proposed, it has to go to the relevant committee, and it could probably die in the committee without ever reaching a floor vote in the House. It would go nowhere in the Senate. And I think, as was said, the people in the Department of State are for once quite rightly keeping their mouths shut and their powder dry and waiting for this to blow over. Because there's one thing I think that has to be kept in mind. AGOA is a gift. That's true. I mean, we basically give free access to an economy like South Africa, though. What then overlooked is that gift to South Africa has regional implications. The South African economy that's vibrant and working well also positively impacts the economies of other countries in the region. And I think the people in policymaking positions might be aware of that, should be, and will think of that before they actually make any decisions. And going to Chris's comment about, the South Africans violated the terms of AGOA long ago. So have several countries. But if you notice the announcement that was made late last year about the countries that would lose their AGOA access, there was a little inconsistency in terms of some of the countries that got it were guilty of the same things that the countries who didn't get it were guilty of. AGOA has never really been managed or it's a gift that has been given to people we like or people we feel that need to get the gift for various reasons. And I don't think we've ever applied AGOA the way it was written in the legislation to be applied. And I don't think we ever will, frankly. I mean, if we were going to remove AGOA benefits from countries that didn't live up to all of the requirements, there would be very few countries on the continent that would actually be getting AGOA.
All right, thank you very much. Right, so Sicheba, you have been going back and forth, right? But listening to the conversation, right? The bill that we are talking about, people in the US do not really know about it, right? Mostly it was covered on Agua Info by Tralec, right? So it means in South Africa, it's a big deal in South Africa. But over here in the United States, people don't really care. People don't even know there's a bill like that in Congress right now. What is your take on Agua? Let's assume that the bill goes through. What is going to be the impact, right, of Agua being withdrawn from South Africa? What is going to be the real impact on the South African economy?
Ben, who's the question to?
I think it's
So-
struggling.
Chaba, but we can't hear his microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sichaba, I agree with Chris. That load shedding, you need to fix. You need to fix that load shedding, Sichaba.
SCOB, the Christmas gift that keeps giving.
Load shedding, it's affecting
Yeah,
audio.
Yeah. No, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself. Let me see whether I can unmute you from here. No. All right. All right. So once we are waiting for you to give us your thoughts, let's go to the next narrative, right? The next narrative is going to be on ANC winning dominance. Is it a reflection of its loss of permanent control over the state? Right. So we'll go into that. So there's a paper published by Christopher Isaka of University of Pretoria, a professor of African Studies, South African, and Hakeem Onapojo, a senior lecturer of the Political Science International Affairs of Nile University. In their article published by South African Press prior to the 2019 elections, they titled The Decline of Dominant Political Party, the Case and Future of South African National Congress. Now, the authors in their introduction write, to many South Africans, it is unthinkable that the African National Congress will ever lose its over 20 years dominance in South African politics. Notwithstanding the deluge of criticism surrounding the leadership of South African ruling party in the post-apartheid era, it is still perhaps wishful thinking to expect that any single opposition party could possibly oust the party and dominate the political space in years to come. However, the authors continue. The outcome of the 2016 municipal election in South Africa, which saw the ruling ANC losing some of its former stronghold constituency, including 4 major metropolitan municipalities, adds weight to the growing suggestions that it might lose national elections in the future. This view is reinforced by lingering corruption cases such as the 1999 arms deal, neglect, and the state capture scandal, over which the ANC has seemingly lost control over the parliament to the more vocal opposition, the DA and the EFF. Furthermore, there were increased calls within the ANC itself for the resignation of President Zuma and the National Executive Committee over a series of embarrassing corruption scandals demonstrating deep-seated friction within the ruling party. The authors identify several theoretical perspectives why dominant parties experience moments of failure and sometimes complete disappearance from the political scenes, which includes opposition coordination, institutional electoral reforms, high level of corruption, and factional conflict within the party. We are going to focus our attention on the two, what is corruption and what? Abuse of power, right? And factions. So let us, Jude, can you show us 16.2, figure 16.2, on the way the ANC has been faring in elections for the past 20 years since 1994? I want to take a look at that graph to see how it has been losing support over the years. Right, so this is elections as far back as 1994 to 2019, right, in terms of the way the ANC has been faring, in terms of colored, white, Asian, and African. So you see that in 1994, we had almost like 80% of Blacks or Africans voting for it. In 1999, it increased a little bit. In 2004, it started dropping. In 2009, it's dropping. In 2014, it's dropping slightly. And in 2019, it's dropping slightly. So there's a gradual decrease. And if you look at colored people, it shows a little bit of an increase from 1999, 2004, 2009, Then 2014, it dropped. Then 2019, it dropped further. Let's look at colored people. There was an increase. It dropped in 1999. Then increase in 2004. It dropped again in 2009. It increased in what? 2014, and it decreased, right? So there's been what? That kind of fluctuations, right? So let's see how these fluctuations has occurred under the various governments. Can you show us the rise and fall of ANC support under the party's leadership since 1994? Yeah, Jude, can you show us the rise and fall of ANC support under the party's leadership since 1994? So we have this diagram, right, which is showing the way it has been going down. So in 1994, during Mandela's time, it was around 63. Then we went to Thabo Mbeki, where it increased to around 65. It goes on to 68. Then we come all the way to Zuma. Then it started decreasing all the way down to below, let's say, 50%, right? So there has been a decrease, right? So let's go back to, you can take that off now. Let's look at what? On corruption. Looking at a graph, will you agree that there's a growing disenchantment over recurring high levels of corruption, which represent a substantial reason why the loss of the hegemony of the ANC party since 2004? Let's go to you first. Phil, would you say that corruption plays a key role with the level at which the ANC has been seeing its vote reducing under the various leadership?
I would say partly yes, but I'll be more careful with this, because the South African people have been quite faithful to the ANC, a vast majority of them, even when it was clear that it had become quite deeply entrenched in corruption. So the South African people kind of gave the ANC a longer leash than perhaps other countries may have. And we must understand how this is it leads us to this moment where I would say it's quite dangerous. Ambassador Ray probably has more experience on this. It was in the 2000s in Zimbabwe. I call it the Zanufication of the ANC, where you want to stay in power and you use three things. One is going to be ideology. South Africans are no longer kind of that ideological, if they ever have been. They are kind of moved by human experience and what they see as the government's role in their lives on a daily basis. And two, the government, as it did in Harare, Mugabe used race to, he went viral on YouTube regaling us with the bad white man who's the big boogie. And while we were looking at the big bad white man, Tony Blair, keep your UK, and calling Ambassador Ray all sorts of names. I kind of remember in the Herald, he was a star in Harare. I won't repeat the names here, but I got to respect him for his thick skin. You know, his raison d'etre in Harare was just bad. And while they were pillaging the economy, while Zimbabwean women were giving birth on floors, right? While no new hospitals were being built in 10 years. Okay, except the ones that were built by the UK. The third one, what I call the ultimate question, land. Mugabe used that as well then. So whatever we're going to do with it, don't worry about it, but we want to use these to survive. So the ANC is at the cusp, I would say, of such. So beyond corruption as kind of a phenomenon, we want to be, I would argue that we must look at human experience. And that is what is driving people's, is going to be very pivotal here. And what the ANC is willing to do to stay in power. And there are worrying signs, if I may say, you know, the meetings between Mnangagwa and Ramaphosa, the lack of condemnation of Harare during the election. And so what worries me the most is this so-called alliance of liberation parties in Southern Africa that speaks about historical ties, but actually it manifests in transnational movement of state funds to be able to keep each other in power. And remember, it sounds great, Pan-Africanism, one Africa. You know, who doesn't want Pan-Africanism? But what if Pan-Africanism keeps an ANC in power longer than it should, using, you know, I won't mention names, but some other Southern African liberation, funds. So there you go. So it's beyond corruption.
All right. So because we have a problem with the Chairback internet, right? Can you hear me now?
I could hear you. I'm just wondering, can you hear me?
Okay, right. So let me come to you, right? Instead of we discussing the corruption, I want to get back to you first. Has the Ramaphosa government done enough to distance itself from the cadet deployment? Why we have people who are committed to the ANC, who are put in various positions, right? Deployment from some of the findings of the Zondi Commission, which was set up by the president to investigate corruption, fraud, maladministration, and unethical conduct during former President Zuma's administration. That concluded that cadet deployment, which is an ANC policy applied at a national level in recruiting high, dedicated, motivated, and trained members of the ANC into positions at various levels of government, contributed to state capture. Do you think the Ramaphosa government has done enough to distance itself from that particular deployment policy when members of the ANC are put in strategic positions either at the national level, at the metropolitan level, or provincial level, and at the local level? Has they done enough since the Zondi Commission said what that itself promotes corruption? Kichaba.
He froze. He dropped off.
Right. Okay. So let's come back to you, Chris. Right. Would you say that if, because we normally say corruption was very high under Zuma, but right under Zuma, the corruption, the level of support for the ANC is going down, way down. Right. The point is that is corruption one of the mitigating factors that sees the spiral reduction in the ANC vote in South Africa?
Well, let's be clear about corruption. The thing about corruption is if it benefits certain people, then obviously they don't have a problem with it, whether it's in Chicago, DC, Philadelphia, or Harare, or Joburg. That's the reality. And the ANC, as I tell people all the time, doesn't represent South Africans. It represents cadres, or cadres, as we say in America and France. That's who they're out for, their patronage network to retain their power. And look, political parties do this if they have the ability to do it. So I'm not picking the ANC, although I could. But here's the thing about corruption in South Africa. Corruption hasn't been the reason people have left the ANC or turned against it. But the outcomes of corruption are the reasons why the ANC is in trouble this year. Pervasive corruption translates into service delivery failures. And in South Africa, the system of governance is set up so that the government provides many of the services, and much of us in the developed world, well, South Africa is in between there, developed and developing, in the developed world, take for granted come from the private sector. My rubbish is picked up by a private company that I paid for. And while the rates have gone up a lot, it's still picked up reliably. And even with 6 inches of snow, they came the next day when they promised they would come. That isn't the case in South Africa. Water delivery failures. South Africans don't drive on the road. They drive, the potholes. They drive around I forget the phrase there, but the roads are so bad in South Africa now. The rails have been stripped by thieves. Electricity is just a disaster there. Rape and all these different things. The government failing to provide the basic services it's supposed to do. It translates into it. And corruption has been there for a long time. It's gone from the comical, the embarrassing Tony Yangani getting a discount on a car loan and going to prison over that, to pervasive billions and billions and billions, perhaps even trillions of dollars of theft. And we've got corruption deals going back that never really hurt the ANC support, like the arms deal. That was a $4.6 billion arms deal that was wholly unnecessary. The money should have been put into the South African army so they could do peacekeeping. Instead, they bought Gripens and Type 209 diesel submarines and cruisers, things they'll never use. And now all but one of the Gripens can't fly. They wasted that money. So the arms deal, the Oilgate scandal, which they sold the National Petroleum Reserve off to a company that was a BEE tender, that's the Empowerment Group, and then they pay them to maintain it, even though it was South Africa's oil. The Travelgate scandal, none of these things resonated. The dairy freight, the Verita dairy farm scandal in the Free State with Ace Magashule, the 251 million rand asbestos contract corruption in the Free State with Ace Magashule, Paul Mashatile's corruption allegations now, Zandile Gumeda's 168 counts of corruption in eThekwini, also known as Durban. And unfortunately, many people call it Durban these days because it's fallen to such poor states of condition under ANC governance. Corruption is not the reason the ANC is in trouble. service delivery failure, the failure to provide basic services and create the conditions in which South Africans can flourish. If you want to start a spaza or a tuck shop, good luck with that. You're going to be shaken down by gangs if you don't get shot in a taxi war. I'm embellishing a little bit here, but not much. It's a tough sled for South Africans. And the reason the ANC is in trouble isn't directly corruption. South Africans have put up with a lot of corruption, but they're not putting up with the service delivery, especially, as Ambassador Ray said, younger folks. And if they turn out to vote, that could be disastrous for the ANC, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng provinces. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, the Zandi Commission made the argument that deploying cadets into various positions contributed to state capture. Is there anything wrong with putting loyalists in various positions in government? Ambassador Ray, is there anything wrong with that?
If those loyalists are unqualified, disastrous, stupid, unable to do their jobs, yes, there's something very wrong with it. And I don't even have to use South Africa as an example there. I'll use the previous administration here, where the hallmark of getting a government assignment was your loyalty to the head guy at the top rather than your capability. When you create a situation where the qualifications or the getting a job depends on your political loyalty and not your capability, what you do is you send a signal to the society that if you're with us, the road ahead is paved with gold. If you're not, the road ahead is not open to you, and that's demoralizing. And I would agree with Chris. It's like corruption. People who benefit from corruption don't complain about it, but people who are disadvantaged because of the outcome of corruption and delivery of electricity and water, being able to be treated at a health clinic, that resonates with people because that affects them. I would give an example in Sierra Leone back in the 1990s when I was in our embassy there. One of the things that led to the coup in 1992, when the young army guys took over, had nothing to do with corruption or with them not liking the president, who was a very corrupt person, but had everything to do with the fact, as one of the young captains who was part of the junta said, when he had men who were injured in fights with the rebels and they would be taken to the hospital, they would have to bring their own bandages because the hospital didn't have bandages to bandage their wounds. That's what people react to, not the corruption itself, but to how that corruption affects their daily lives.
Yeah, but let me come to Lieutenant Akorka, right? Yeah, like you say, we're making the argument that corruption is everywhere, right? But a situation whereby you put loyalists into various positions, they come back to help to build your party, right? They come back to build the ANC, which is good for the ANC.
But is it good for the country? And that's the question. If you're in a government position, you are supposed to be doing things that benefit the country writ large. If all you're in that position to do is build your party, for your party, that's good. But after a while, if you're not delivering the goods, you're also going to undercut your party because your party is not delivering the services that people expect.
Ben, if I could jump in just a second, can I jump in just a second to add what Ambassador Ray said there? Thanks. Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to get this in. This is exacerbated by the fact that South Africa is representative democracy. People don't vote for who sits in those positions. They vote for a party list. And that makes this even more insidious. So, for example, not to pick on a group of people, but let's just pick a random thing. Someone from the northern part of the country who speaks Venda, who grew up in that part, in the Lowveld or the Highveld up there, is deployed by Lutuli House, the headquarters of the ANC, to the Western Cape, where people speak Xhosa and Afrikaans, and some speak English primarily. That's not exclusive, but primarily. And they have a different set of cultural values than other parts of the country, and the society is a little bit different. This person comes down. If their constituents are unhappy, they don't care, because they don't answer the constituents, not like politicians here who can be thrown out, although incumbency is hard to overcome. But politicians here can be thrown out at the ballot box eventually. But in South Africa, the only way to get rid of them is the next election. And the only way to get rid of them is voting for another party. And that really hasn't changed outcomes. So when a party like the ANC deploys its cadres around the country, what it's doing is, as you've alluded to, Ben, and Ambassador mentioned also, it is reinforcing its strength and loyalty. And the bottom line with the ANC, there's one thing that matters. You know, Zuma is not in trouble with the ANC because he formed another party. He's in trouble with the ANC because he's been disloyal to it. When you become disloyal to the ANC, just ask Julius Malema, they tossed you aside. Once you start talking, that's the thing. And loyalty is the single most important value to the African National Congress. If you're loyal to the ANC, it doesn't matter how corrupt, how inept, how dishonest, what a cheat you are or incompetent. You will stay with the ANC and they will cover your backside. Dr. Zweli Mkhize, by the Special Investigating Unit, was found to be guilty in the Digital Vibes case. They have the evidence. They committed crimes. He has not left Parliament. He remains a member of Parliament, drawing a state salary in the background. He should have been charged with a crime and taken to court and let a jury or a judge decide. They don't get a jury. That should have happened. But the ANC has protected him, and no one's talking about Zweli Mkhize now. They're hoping it just goes away. All he did was resign as health minister. And that's the tragedy of cater deployment and this nonsense. That's what's happening. And it's really tragic for South Africa because voters have no recourse whatsoever. Thank you for letting me interject.
All right, thank you. Before I go to Lieutenant Tarkoka, let me come back to you, Fiwo, in terms of factionalism, right? Factions within the ANC. We know that the ANC is a coalition made up of what? The South African Communist Party and the COSATU, right? But there are those who make the argument that there are also factions in terms of the Xhosa and the Zulu people, based on what happened between in 2017 when they went for Congress. Do you see this thing playing a role in terms of the erosion of South Africa losing its electorates?
Well, I would offer that. I don't know too much about
Okay, hold on. Let's go to Fiwo first, then we'll come to you. Yeah, okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Fiwo.
Awesome. I was going to say, in a way, but I want to preface this by saying South Africans, of all African countries I've ever seen, are the most harmonious among the different nationalities. South Africans intermarry. South African Twitter is replete with even tribal jokes, but no one hates anyone. You know, Zulus are stubborn. This good-naturedness, which is built on Ubuntu, that, you know, this doesn't affect, people don't hate one another. There's never been tribal wars in the last 100 years in South Africa, right? However, there's been sometimes tribal sensitivities, regionalism that has been deployed sometimes by wily politicians in order to forward political means. I won't mention names yet because my people are very sensitive about this, but we do know that there was a political party in KwaZulu-Natal which has made, by the way, historically, with this history of being able to deploy Zulu nationalism in the national kind of political arena, has left a sour taste sometimes and has made the supply of votes in KwaZulu-Natal be quite elastic. It's quite elastic. That is why then the ANC has never really cornered KwaZulu-Natal. It has often cornered it depending on how many people from KwaZulu-Natal are within the top 6. Now, let me be honest on this one. And then for the Eastern Cape, there was this idea that, you know, it's the home of the fathers of the ANC, the Mbeki and Mandela. So there is this idea that its vote there is quite also quite rigid in a way. Some of us have said that it may contribute to why it has the worst infrastructure, because the people there, if you put Winnie the Pooh saying, I want to be president of the ANC, they'll still vote for them as long as there's ANC, because there's this romanticism with the ANC. It's the party of Mandela. And so we don't want to disappoint him. But in KwaZulu-Natal, I meant to correct my earlier statements here. The vote has been elastic. It has been quite elastic. And so these tribal sensitivities, I would say, yes, they do play a role, but sometimes not as insidious, not as deadly or as violent as they have in the past. However, they still play a consequential one that we must look at, worth looking at.
All right, thank you. Let's come to Lieutenant Korka. If you look at the ANC Congress in 2017, right, they had 5,000 people actually electing the leader of the ANC. Sarah Mafosa had 2,440 out of 5,000. And Dlamini Zuma, who is the ex-wife of the former President Zuma, had almost 2,261. So to me, the party was divided. Right? Based on what you see in terms of the electorate, don't you think this was also a contributing factor to the faction that we have that has deepened the woes of the ANC since 1999 up to current the election that we are heading into?
Well, I think absolutely. And so that is it. I think it's just a factor of how this is evolving over time. And it's so, and it's interesting on this one here that you talk about, because you do mention Zuma. And what is also a feature of many countries, including the U.S., is name recognition. And so there's a bit much of the electorate who understands, the former president Zuma, and so it makes perfect sense that if his ex-wife and her name is on the ballot, that would draw attention in and of itself. And I think you see it. That's like in the U.S. with the Kennedys or with the Bushes or so on and so forth. And so that's not a big surprise that there's a splinter there. And so whether or not that divide takes roots and grows and then spreads and over time has yet to be seen. Back on corruption. Just a couple of responses to the other distinguished guests is that absolutely service delivery failures, absolutely corruption. And some may look at corruption as in a negative light, but it's just a feature of humanity. If you're in power, you are the power, and the power concentration in Africa is not for the general public. They don't think in terms of the citizens, of the public, of supporting, of service delivery, of law enforcement. So they just think of at the moment the governance and the elected officials just kind of are insular and looking to continue to conduct business as usual, not only as usual but as historical as has been done in the past. And so they don't see it as problematic. They're just doing what the last guy did and so on and so forth. And so that's part of the challenge is that we're in a different day and age, and your next topic may go to the youth, but again, and both youth and technology. So things are more exposed; they're more open. Folks see it. When South Africans or when Gambians or when Nigerians or Nigerians or so forth, the youth, when they hear things kind of in the public domain, when they are on the internet and they're seeing things or they're hearing things, they're saying, "Oh, why not us?" And so I think it's a matter of time that many of the African countries will have to transition. There's a reason why the country falls into the category of extreme poverty. And that's because all the service delivery has not been there for not only decades, but maybe centuries or longer. And why have they been in extreme poverty and lack of service delivery? Again, it's the leadership. The leadership is not accustomed or tuned to running effective bureaucracies or governments or so forth. At the moment, that is not their mentality. The mentality is, and particularly things like the ANC or others, is that they are the mentality of the people in power is to stay in power, And so, and not only the people want to stay in power, but their system that keeps them in power wants to keep in power because it's affecting their livelihood as well. And so you have machines over there, political machines that are in the business of keeping the people where they are. And so, and that is, and I think I would hope that you know what the youth, what the up and coming generation is seeing is that not only are we falling behind, we are way behind, and something has to change for us, not only to catch up and to leapfrog and to do all those other kind of things, but to simply be progressive. Not in addition to what Chris talked about in service delivery, you know, the other feature of progressive countries is innovation. And so research and development, these types of things. And so they are not accustomed to this innovation. They're not accustomed to being progressive and so forth. So Young Do spoke earlier about the human experience, about the government's role in the daily life and so forth. That's my contribution to it, is that those things that's part of the part of the equation as well. And I just have said, as many have seen it in many of the countries on the continent, and so and the issues that or the characteristics of the ANC mimic that of others, maybe South Sudan, maybe you know, right now in Senegal, with them kind of having the election disturbance, the Gambia, you know, they have the with the ANC in its future, they change. And so the Yahya Jammeh was in power for 23 years. He thought he would continue to be in power. In Senegal, you had the Senghor, who maybe, I think he was 20 years, and then Diouf in 20 years. They think that's they have a right to serving those, and when they serve, the people around them are serving as well. And so it's a matter of evolution for the polities. We don't talk about them as democracies in the same light or vein as the American democracy. You can't, because they're just kind of apples and oranges. But part of it is trying to understand better, you know, what is going on with the African polity, and helping it to progress. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Since you brought up the issue of youth and technology, right? Let's go to the narrative on youth unemployment and unregistered voters' effect in the upcoming elections. So data released by Statistics South Africa in May 2023 shows that a total number of unemployed youth aged between 15 to 34 years stands at 4.9 million as a result of a 1.1 increase from last quarter of 2022 to 46.5 for the first quarter of the year. In comparison, the country's overall official unemployment rate stands at 32.9. If you dig deeper, youth between the age of 15 to 24 years and those between 25 to 34 years, their unemployment rate is between 62.1 and 40.7, which is way higher than the national unemployment rate. So let's, Jude, can you show us the data on registered voters in South Africa? And we are going to look at the data on the youth. Jude, show us the data, the graph on registered voters in South Africa. Then we can discuss that. All right, but I remember I sent the data to you, right? So in the last election, let me pose this question. In the last election, the ANC only got 10 million voters. And there is data showing that from the Electoral Commission saying that 40 million unregistered young people in the country did not register to vote, right? 40 million out of they never registered. In the last election, the ANC got 10 million votes. If the 40 million unregistered young South Africans decide to vote. Now let's come back to you, Ambassador Charles Ray. Could this electorate unseat the ANC or make the ANC lose its dominance and control over the state?
I don't think there's any argument that they could. I mean, that's 4 times the number of votes that the ANC got, according to your statistics. And so if those 40 million unregistered younger voters register, and just looking at some of the data that you provided and my own conversations with people in the South African government when I was in Zimbabwe in the 2009 to 2012, if those 40 million unregistered young voters register and they go to the polls, that's the death knell for the ANC, because if your previous chart where you showed the support for the ANC among all categories, I look more, instead of the actual numbers, I look at sort of the trend lines, and the trend is actually downward. I mean, if you average out, what you see is that the ANC has experienced a decline in support from all demographics of voters, and that includes Black South Africans. But if you look at the fact that 40+% of the young people who are eligible to vote never register or never vote, that decline could be even more severe if they were to participate in the elections. And 40 million, it's just guessing, but I mean, if 40 million young people register to vote in this year's election, I think you could expect more than 50% of those young people not to vote for the ANC. So that's really that's a frightening prospect. If I were in the ANC, I would be worried about that right now. And in fact, as I said earlier in my remarks, I think the ANC does not have time to register its own young voters. And a lot will depend on what the other parties, the EFF and the DA, have done to try and encourage young people to vote. I think what you would see would be those two parties primarily would share in the voters. Whether that would mean that the ANC would be completely out of the picture, I don't know. It would depend on the breakdown.
Yeah, thank you.
But I
Let's
think
come
it would
to
certainly.
Yeah, let's go to Chris, right? Let's assume that these 40 million people decide to register and vote. What are the alternatives? The EFF is more Marxist. Its ideologies are far anti-capitalist, and the DA more or less is people see it as a representation of the white regime. What is the way out in this situation?
Well, it's a fair question. It's comical to hear that the DA is still described as a white party when the vast majority of its voters are actually colored in South Africa. Whites make up a minority of its voters, but they do make up a significant portion of its leadership, and that's how the press gets away with calling them a white party. The options for them, well, the thing about this is that the majority of South Africans are now born frees, born after 1994. The only rule they've ever known in their entire lives, whether they're white, black, colored, Christian, Muslim, or Indian, or Jewish, the only rule that they know is ANC rule, with some exceptions to provincial and some municipalities briefly. The ANC has led the country at the national level ever since 1994. And this just doesn't work. The ANC has a major problem when its president devotes his time in the State of the Nation address, which wasn't a State of the Nation. It was a campaign speech, which was horrible, but we're regaling about the struggle and the century history of his party. Youth aren't interested in that. They care. They're not motivated by stories about Luthuli and Tambo and Mandela. They are motivated about what's been happening in their lifetime the past 5 years. And the party they can blame for that in most cases is the ANC. Now, where are they going to go? Well, the three most likely places people go, depending on where they are, in Gauteng, I think a number of youth may gravitate towards Action SA, Herman Mashaba's breakaway party there, which has gained some traction in Gauteng. We'll see. In KZN, well, in the by-election results we saw just a couple of days ago, Mkhonto we Sizwe, the stolen name of the armed wing of the ANC by Jacob Zuma, that party got 21% recently in its first by-election, just got 28%. Now, they're small constituencies, but that could signal something about youth voting for MK and distracting from the ANC. And finally, a lot of voters who unfortunately are victims of the ANC's horrible education system. You know, Cyril Ramaphosa is fond of saying Bantu education was worse than no education at all. And that's a good argument. But I agree, ANC Bantu education is disastrous. They've lowered educational standards. They've neglected schools. They've abused South Africans. And as a consequence, education levels in much of the country have fallen off a cliff. Now, they report high standards, but when a passing grade to get through matric is 30% in 3 subjects and 40% in your first language, that's not exactly a reliable statistic saying 85 or 90% of people have graduated. The point here is that a lot of people who are not particularly well informed are likely, younger voters, I believe, to gravitate towards the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters. I think they have the ability to draw, in part because people find Julius Malema to be appealing. I don't, but some people do. Many, especially younger voters, do. So the short answer to that is that some of these opposition parties like Action SA, MK, EFF, and I did leave one party out. And the reason I left it out, but I'll bring it in here really quickly, is because it's episodic. It depends on where it's at. And that's Gayton McKenzie's Patriotic Alliance. Some young voters may go there. And I think that's kind of what the situation is here. It's fascinating and disheartening for me as I travel around South Africa and I talk to Sotho and Tswana and Afrikaners and Germans and Zulu and Xhosa all over the country, and coloreds and Indians. South Africans don't know their history. They do not know their own history. It is disturbing. Of course, I could say the thing about Americans now. My goodness, and we don't know political science here anymore either. This is anyway. But the point is that, especially groups in the what used to be the Transvaal and in Mpumalanga, Northwest, and in Gauteng, so many people don't know their own history, whether it's their own ethnic history or the history of South Africa or even of the struggle. And that's how the ANC is able to co-opt the narrative that they brought liberation to South Africa when they were just one player. The Pan-African Congress, the Black Sash Movement, Steve Biko and Black Consciousness, so many other players played a major role. The ANC has co-opted all the history and tried to even claim the Black Consciousness Movement, and they got away with it. But these days, that narrative isn't working with younger voters. They want service delivery. They want education. They want bursaries. They want to go to school. They want to be able to start a job and not be harassed. And they don't want to be killed as a bystander in a taxi war. So Action SA, MK, and EFF, depending on where you're at, I think are going to be the big beneficiaries. And the losers will be parties that should have done better, like the African Christian Democratic Party. Most South Africans are devout Christians, and there's a big fertile base for them. And the other two parties that are going to lose out here that should have done better are the Democratic Alliance, which is, you know, for whatever reason, is just floating along and not going up. And then finally, the Freedom Front Plus, which should have done a better job appealing to Black South Africans. It's tried, but it has not been as successful. It has the legacy of its founding, which was extreme right. The current party is not extreme right party. It is a right of center conservative party, but on the South African political spectrum, they look like Nazis compared to everybody else, and they're not even remotely that. So that's the unfortunate situation. Long answer, but Action SA, MK, and EFF. Thank you.
Yeah, let's listen to your take on that, right? We know that the EFF has made a lot of inroads into poor communities, poor people. He's been able to reach out to them, right? But saying what we say in Parliament, the way the EFF behaves in Parliament, let's assume that these 14 million people shift towards the EFF. What should we expect in the Parliament?
Well, remember, South Africa has a history of political disruption and chaos. Being chaotic during it's actually, that's where most student leaders in South Africa cut their teeth as political leaders in SASCO. If you won't be a president of SASCO in a South African university if you haven't spilled a trash can and burned something during your tenure. That's how you show yourself as a revolutionary, having a revolutionary spirit, actually. And those people grow up to go into the Youth League, to go into ANC, and they can speak of their long history of struggle. So this idea of disruption, what might be sensitive in our Western sensitivities here, maybe in the US, is actually in South Africa, it's quite normal. It's quite normal, as it would be in France with people burning manure next to the Arc de Triomphe. So the idea of violence in South Africa is also romantic, in a romanticized struggle. Well, not a lot of people fought really, but they like to purport a narrative of fighting. Now, the EFF has tapped into that, So what might be looked at in Parliament as disruption actually augurs well. It looks good to the young people who feel like the old people go to Parliament to sleep. They no longer care about the issues, and they need to be challenged. So this irreverence of the EFF, which in other countries may be looked down upon, in South Africa, it's political gold. However, behind this, we must look at in South Africa also, it also matters who your sponsors are as a political party. And then when the rubber hits the road of your policies, what you really would like. You mentioned earlier, it's a communist party. No one is a communist in South Africa, Ben, let's face it. People talk communism, they talk Marxist. Really, there isn't. You can't live in South Africa and wear Gucci shoes and drive a Mercedes Benz like most politicians do and most EFF's top leaders do, and wear Ferragamo, but on top you wear domestic workers uniform and say Marxism. So this mouthing off of Marxist platitudes is par for the course again in South African politics, and there's an implicit knowledge among the South Africans. The South Africans know, okay, yeah. They're talking like that because they would like to corner a segment of young idealists at Wits University. But how that translates now in a national level of running a country is quite different. And I want to emphasize, I always sound negative to my American students when I talk about this. You cannot put race aside. Because the students that grow up, the born-frees that grow up in the suburbs and they grow up and then matric, they have white friends and matric. But in South Africa, as the ANC's misrule starts to become apparent, it manifests in race. The paths diverge after matric. Your white former classmates might have collateral from their parents' house that was paid off in a nice suburb that has more value to start a business. So their innovation can gain traction very quicker. You might be black, come from a middle-class family, but your father and mother were the first to get a business bond. They were the first to be able to live in the suburbs. So you have no legacy. I won't call it privilege because that's unfair to the people that work hard on the other side. But you don't have a lot of things to start. So you rely on a functioning government that has programs for gifted people like yourselves. So quickly then, that's how you see born-frees. That's why many people are mystified. Why are these South African born-frees still think in racial terms? It's because as they grow up, the mist starts to lift and their worlds start being economically driven through race, because that's how South African society, unfortunately is. And that's how then the likes of Malema can gain so much traction from still using race, because they are people who grow up in Sandton, but now are unemployed. Now, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault, but a politician that comes and says, it's white privilege, it's those people over there, okay? Even though you've never really grown up around black people, you grew up in South, you start saying, well, it makes sense. And that's how a Malema can make it. Why is this important for an election? It's because an ANC that wants a coalition partner, it's not beneath the ANC to be able to say, well, come over here, Malema, give us 50% plus, and before you know it, the ANC is all about those platitudes, which are quite divorced sometimes from the realities of everyone in the country. That's my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I want to come to Lieutenant Corker, right? Based on what Fiwo just said, if the ANC says that it's losing its majority, and most of the unregistered voters decide to go the way of Malema, right? Would the ANC go into some sort of another coalition, bring another coalition partner into its tent? Apart from the Communist Party, then the COSATU, could they still want to bring Malema back, given that he's been able to reach the poor people?
I'm going to defer to someone else, Ben, because I don't know the actors, the Ebel and the Malema and all those. So I have to defer on this one.
Okay, hold on. Let's go to Ambassador Charles Schroeder. We'll come back to you. Do you see a situation whereby the ANC sees that its majority is threatened, and most of the unregistered voters move in the direction of EFF? They could bring the EFF as part of their coalition.
Yeah, I would say they would. I mean, politicians like to win, and using our politics here in the US, I mean, they will do whatever is necessary to win. And remember, Malema was once part of the ANC, so it wouldn't so much be bringing him in as bringing him back. I could see them painting this as mending fences and bringing Malema back into the fold of the ANC. And if you're talking 40 million extra votes, yeah, I don't think they would hesitate a moment they would make all kinds of great offers to get him to come inside the tent.
All right, I think somebody has a question. Is it Anta? You have a question? Ant 42, do you have a question for any of our panelists? All right, so whilst you are waiting, let's come back to Lieutenant. What is the way out of the ANC in the upcoming election, given what we have discussed so far? Do you see the probability of them losing their dominance in control over the state?
I don't think there's doubt that they're going to lose their dominance, and I suspect that it will happen soon. And I don't think that very many people will be shocked or surprised by it. I think that again, as your statistics already shown, they are definitely on a downward spiral. Most recently in 2016, 2017, where you say you might got a sizable percentage of the vote, and that represented a big split in it there. But I think that from their having started back in '94 up until the present, they have been kind of riding high. And so, but the gravity of the world and global experience is just going to kind of pull it down to the reality. So many of those other factors have not bode well for ANC and ANC leadership. And again, with many of the youth not deriving or seeing or experiencing any benefit from their leadership, it does seem inevitable to me that others will change course. What I didn't know was that if I understood the speakers correctly, is Bantu the national language in South Africa?
It's a group of languages. There are many of them, Bantu language families. But
Okay,
there's
the
12,
Bantu language
12
family.
there's 12 official languages now with the inclusion of South African Sign Language. But that includes Afrikaans and Sotho and Tswana and Zulu and Xhosa, and it goes on and on.
Okay. So, and with that, the reason I bring up the language is that going back to '94, then when the ANC comes to power, prior to that, again, there was a very long period with the under the leadership of the Nationalist Party, and also just under apartheid, and then under the Afrikaner language. So I don't know to what extent that since the ANC took power and Nelson Mandela, that they have a strong history of a recorded history that is presented in the classroom. And that is just a function of growth, is that they're starting, in a crawl, walk, run scenario, just with the country and coming together as a country. And so, but I think the ANC, like the former apartheid party and National Party, I just think that their time is up. And so they are in a transition period for new leadership, and I just think that is just as apartheid fell. I think that the ANC will follow a similar path, unless there's some new energy somehow infused in it, not only with the new energy but with new policies. And so if someone were able to come on the scene and able to do some, as previously mentioned, have a platform of not this party platform to vote for the party, but I don't know if a political platform is in their future to say, okay, well, these are the things that we intend to deliver to the public in the coming next election period, from election period being from one election to the next election. And so, to answer your question, Ben, I think that the ANC is on its way out.
All right, thank you. Now, let's come to a few. Right, Ramaphosa is considered to be more progressive compared to Zuma, ex-wife. Right, he was more radical. And if Ramaphosa, who is more progressive, is taking us this path, right? Is it time for the ANC to be out? Because Ramaphosa is more progressive in his policies compared to the radical Zuma, right? And even given this situation as a progressive, you see the ANC losing its grip. So is it time for the ANC now in the coming election? Do you see a situation like that? They are going to lose parliament.
That's a great question. I would caution any perspective that looks at Ramaphosa's so-called progressiveness as being consequential to ANC policy, because you overestimate this. It's overestimating the power of Ramaphosa in the South Africans, in the ANC skullduggery that takes place in the ANC, in these congresses, that it's often a draw. It's often a draw. No one really comes out on top. Usually, and that's the nature of the ANC. That's what usually keeps. That's why it's very difficult for the ANC to ever reform, because for one reformist in the top 6, for one reformist wing, there's an anti-reformist wing whose votes you need in an inelastic voting district where they just go with whatever that person says. So if that person is anti-reform, there's not going to be reform, regardless of who the president of the ANC is. Most importantly, Ramaphosa does not have a nativist constituents. There is no neighborhood that he can walk into and everyone says, yay, and they scream his name, versus a Zuma who says, our viewers should appreciate this. Zuma says one day, I'm not voting for the ANC, I'm supporting this party. It has no constitution. It has no political leaders. We don't know whose headquarters they are, but they're already giving people political nightmares. Right? Why? Because he's such a figure, the opposite of Ramaphosa, who elicits, and I call this nativism, that the people just say he speaks respectfully, things that matter in South African society. Yes, he doesn't speak English, but most of us don't speak English very well, so we relate to him. He didn't finish school. Sounds very fancy and very bad for a leader when you are in Sandton and Rosebank. But in Umgeni, in Richards Bay, that sounds like my uncle. My uncle didn't finish school because of apartheid. And he smiles and speaks real Zulu with the people. And of course, he doesn't read numbers very well. I can't read numbers very well, you see? So such a person, based on just showing on their own cognizance, people are often ready to risk it all. And Ramaphosa does not have any of those. So any then progressiveness of Ramaphosa impresses a different constituency. Our question is, does that constituency hold water now? And is it able to determine the election of the ANC moving forward or the country? And that's, I would say, we have a problem. And why it's a problem, it's because such a person willing to stay in power may be willing to go farther and compromise less, may be willing to go farther than a Zuma who might say, well, I have people that I need to go back to that kind of look at me as an elder, maybe. So a Zuma, contrary to our expectation, may be actually a better bargain for progressiveness, because remember, he was the first to sign the US-South Africa agreement to have joint military training in South Africa. He was the one who saved lives. I go on South African Twitter and South Africans say, I don't care what Maggie says. I don't care what Ramaphosa says. My mom died of AIDS, and Zuma put a stop to women, to child and AIDS, passing on of the AIDS disease through agreeing, and he stopped politicizing the AIDS disease, where Maggie had said, well, does AIDS cause a syndrome? And it was a long debate. Zuma said, the people are dying. The Americans say they'll stop them from dying. Come and help my people. And it saved lives. That's how people are going to vote. So I'm sorry to disappoint. It doesn't matter how progressive Ramaphosa is in a nativist election year.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Chris. Right? Is it too late for the ANC to reform, to appeal to the youth at this point? Is it too late?
It is too late.
3 months to go.
It
Yeah.
is too late. Well, it was too late, and before COVID, it was too late. It was already the die was cast. When that party convention occurred in December of 2017, and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma lost by 35 votes, that's when the die was cast. And all these idiots, especially white liberals, running around going, Ramaphosa, a brilliant businessman. Spend 5 minutes analyzing Cyril Ramaphosa. He's a fraud at every way you can imagine. The man is not wealthy because of his business acumen. He's wealthy because he was handed stakes of equity in the companies and he's sitting on it. If you give me $350 million in 1994, I'd have 10 billion today. He doesn't have 10 billion. He's not the brilliant businessman. He's also part of the Zuma state capture era. He was deputy president for years and also was on the board of the platinum company that's responsible for the debacle at Maracana. All this conveniently forgotten. The guy intentionally ignored an insurrection in July 2021, did not even mention what was happening in KZN and in Soweto as Black South Africans were murdered, as shops were looted, a total disaster. For 5 days before he even mentioned it was happening, failed to mobilize the police. And one, not a conspiracy theorist, but one has to wonder whether the state wasn't with him and it opposed him, because this was, make no mistake, not a South African insurrection. It was an ANC insurrection for those who supported Zuma and those who support the main party of the ANC. And look, I've been pretty polite about things, but I do call him Meneer Palapala now, and I think it's a well-deserved nickname for Cyril Ramaphosa. The man is a total fraud. He is not a progressive. He is a get-along, go-along guy who does what he has to say to continue to go along. Here's the thing. You asked about the EFF earlier. As long as Cyril Ramaphosa leads the African National Congress and the ANC can get 50%, they will never have an alliance with EFF, because Cyril Ramaphosa, I know from sources, has a personal, strong distaste for Julius Malema, and they would never do it. However, the ANC is not going to get 50% this year. If I'm correct, and I hope I'm actually wrong and it goes lower, to be honest, but if I'm correct at 38 to 42%, they're going to need a coalition partner. The EFF is going to get 10 to 15%, although some polls are claiming higher now. We'll see. It depends how many people come out for them. 10 to 15%. If they get 10%, the ANC gets 38%, they could still get there with a wild card like the MK party, which is appealing to people without, as was just said, without a charter, without a constitution, without a party headquarters, without a budget, and people are coming out and 28% of people voting. Because, as was mentioned, that was brilliant analysis, Ramaphosa has no constituency. The only constituency in South Africa for Ramaphosa are cadres who have made money off of BE, or the so-called white monopoly capitalists, the people who are elites. The elites are the ones served by Cyril Ramaphosa. South Africans are not served by him. And I think the time that he's been in office as president since 2018 proves beyond a shadow of a doubt. Corruption is so much worse today than it was under Zuma. I'm not defending Zuma. I have no defense of him, but it's so much worse today than ever was. And that was a correct point about Zuma. You know, Mbeki made this nonsense, his shallow feelings about, oh, they're attacking black men's sexuality. No, we were trying to warn you about long distance trucking routes and about the nature of multiple concurrent partnerships. That's not a condemnation of black men's sexuality. It's a statement of reality. Deal with it and address the issue. And he prevented nevirapine from be given to mothers from mother to child transmission, which at the time reduced the transmission and birth by 50%. Today, it's 90+%. It is a disgrace, and people have not forgotten that, and people do remember Jacob Zuma for that, and they'll forgive all the corruption. So I think I got a little bit off topic there, but I just had a moment. I had to go with it. So Meneer Palapala.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, let's come to your closing thought. What will be the future of the ANC if it loses the election this coming May? Let's go to Ambassador Charles Ray. What will be the future of the ANC if it loses dominance?
Well, I think we have to define that more clearly. Losing dominance, I don't think that they're going to do very well, but I also am not sure that means that they're going to lose their hold on power immediately. I mean, I would agree that they are on the way out, but on the way out is very subjective. You know, they could be on their way out for the next 2 or 3 election cycles. In the meantime, you know, things just sort of go from bad to worse. What I see happening is that I think probably the you know, Chris's estimate of, you know, 38 to 42%, whatever, is probably pretty accurate. And they will pick someone among the parties who get enough votes to bring them over that 50% mark to do a coalition. And I think they would look for the party that they can more easily control. I don't see the ANC losing control of the state in this election. I see them becoming vastly weakened from where they are now. And whether that's a wake-up call to members of the ANC that they need to clean up their act and do better or not remains to be seen. If they do, like most politicians, they will just continue to decline until they wither away. If they're smart, they will take advantage of this period to try and rebuild themselves and do better. The experience of political parties in this country, though, leads me to believe that they're just going to continue to wither until they finally just don't exist. They'll go the way of the Whig Party in the United States. They'll just cease to exist, but not in the short term. I mean, I think we're looking at more turmoil.
All right, thank you very much. So let's go to the closing remarks, starting with Lieutenant Ted Corker. How would an ANC take into consideration a weakened ANC look like, right? As part of your closing remarks, right, for the elections coming up.
Thank you. Yeah. So I as Ambassador mentioned, yeah, absolutely, and everyone, certainly they clearly the ANC is on the decline. Now as your chart shows, there was the 60% with Mandela, 70%, 80% back down to 60, and now, as Chris says, 38% to maybe 42%. Absolutely, we'll be able to chip off a chunk of another party to maintain power for in the near term. So and maybe for successive near terms for elections, but I think that they will. The odds are that they will eventually fizzle out. Why? Because it's more likely that they will stay course than to change course. Again, there's no evidence right now that they are looking that they have taken anything as a wake-up call. They don't have at the moment a progressive outlook, and so they will just continue to stay the course to the bitter end. Maybe never don't in today's day and age, with again, I'm just technology, the information age, communications and technology. There are, you never know. We'll never know when it should a light bulb come on with them or with another party. But there is, I think it is. Keep the eye on the youth, and then those statistics: 18 to 24%, 62% unemployed, and 24 to 34, 40% unemployed. That is something to kind of keep a close eye on, because you never know that may kind of tip the balance against the ANC and others. But I would have to again be in agreement that there will get as we have here in the U.S. the base, and so as President Trump has a very sound stable base. Likewise, the ANC has a base. But because they have a multi-party system, and here we have just a two-party and maybe an independent in the near future, and so they have a greater odds of succeeding in the upcoming election. But I think no mistake that the ANC is on the decline.
All right, thank you. Let's go to your closing remarks in terms of trying to frame it in terms of the ANC being weakened in this election and how it will impact their status going forward.
Things that give me a reason for concern, I think three. One, the quite close and consequential relations between the ANC and ZANU-PF, because ZANU-PF of Zimbabwe, I'm not afraid to say this, wrote the textbook on how to survive. how to ensconce the party within the state such that there's no distinction between a public protector, a judge who works for the country, and who's a deployee of the ANC. So the idea that we've all been talking about throughout our interaction, this deployment, it's a gift that keeps giving, and unfortunately, it often works against people enjoying the fruits of that democracy. So that's one thing to watch for. So that's why I'm kind of taciturn with talks of dropping borders and Pan-Africanism and free trade, if it means a coalition of Southern African liberation stalwart parties being able to throw funds to each other to stay in power. Okay, and secondly, I would say there's this idea in South African, what scares me is that the professional South African politician, I hate to compare the US, but it's the best example that came to mind. If Rand Paul loses an election, Senator Rand Paul, he goes back to Kentucky and becomes a doctor. Most ANC politicians have never had jobs other than the current Minister of Police used to be a primary school teacher. Do you think such a person would like to not be a minister next year and not have people get out of his way when he drives? The same way Mugabe had 40 years when he had a long motorcade that would close, and I've seen it live, before he comes and the whole airport closes. So there's an addictiveness to power, but also a quite, if I may, Darwinian survivalism at play here. That will make some of us, that my third point here is that it's not going to be the ANC that runs the country next. It's going to be whoever is able to keep ANC politicians having jobs. And so, so if it's Malema or Jacob Zuma, and in a year where we've kind of seen there's been an increase in polarization, it's quite unlikely that the ANC would resort to a coalition with the DA, because the DA is kind of self-immolated with its kind of neglect of Black leaders, and it's kind of like, which is unfortunate. So it's been looked at as hemorrhaging all Black talent and things like that. And in South Africa, again, I hate, my American students don't like hearing this, but race means a lot in South Africa. It just is. So you can't have a party that rules that is like top 3 or top 1 is, a white male and be able to have a go-go in Soweto vote for you. Does it make sense? No, but it's South Africa, and we take things where we find them. And so that's the next. So maybe if progressive people in the world would like to engage with South Africa and kind of learn more, they should learn more about MK and to have learn more about Malema. Go and read what they call the cardinal pillars and see if you are comfortable with that, because those are the, whether in spirit or in action, those are what is going to be determining South Africa, or the non-existent, hitherto non-existent cardinal pillars of MK, because those are the people that are going to determine South Africa.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's go to Chris. Your closing remarks.
Well, first off, if it's a free and fair election, the ANC will not get 50%. Now, let's not assume it's a free and fair election. I'm not accusing political parties of misconduct. I am raising eyebrows at the Independent Electoral Commission, who fails consistently in doing an effective job. I became involved in helping a political party that was denied its seat on the Zeerust City Council, the Forum for Democrats, because they miscounted the number of votes, 19, and listed 191 in a constituency and gave a proportional representation seat to the EFF. And this is just one example of hundreds that happen in every election. So if free and fair election, which we expect it to by and large be, the ANC will not get 50%. The part about this that's really unfortunate is the ANC of the 2020s is a sad story. It's an abusive political kleptocracy that is about patronage and about stealing, and not about delivering service or liberty to South Africans or economic development. And that is a sad statement on the history, the historic legacy of what was formed in 1912. And really sad to see that. The ANC will not get 50% in this election, but it appears unlikely the opposition can muster 50+1. It seems unlikely. The ANC will dominate in Mpumalanga province. They'll win it handily. They'll dominate in Eastern Cape, as was said earlier, and the Northern Cape, as well as Northwest province. Now, the DA, the main official opposition party, has not successfully coalesced parties or galvanized voters thus far. People aren't talking about the election by and large. Normally, I would be in South Africa right now, but there's our elections coming up, and it's here in Pennsylvania very soon. I'm involved in some activity there. So I'm not in South Africa as I was at this time last year, but I do anticipate being there in advance of the election for it. But the DA has not gotten it going. In fact, the only party I've seen that's actually taken this seriously from my perspective as a political scientist is, ironically, the UIM, the United Independent Movement under Neil de Beer, who began their election campaign in January of last year. Yes, they're a small, tiny party, and everybody hates Neil de Beer because he betrayed apartheid, because he betrayed the ANC, but he resonates particularly with colored voters in the Western Cape. And the point is, he actually started his campaign a year ago when the Democratic Alliance, when the Inkatha Freedom Party, when everyone should have been campaigning on all the ANC failures. So the wild cards in this election, in KZN, the Inkatha Freedom Party, how well it can do. It's had now a couple of years to prove it can govern municipalities. Has it proven that to voters? And will it do better? If it has, that's going to kill the ANC and an MK in that same province. Those are two wild cards. In the Western Cape, they're not going to be strong everywhere, but the Democratic Alliance has just lost constituency to the Patriotic Alliance, who jumped way up. And for whatever reason, Gate McKenzie seems to resonate with some folks in Western Cape, so that's a wild card there. In Gauteng province, the wild card is Action SA and Herman Mashaba, who can do very well. The bottom line here is that whatever happens with South Africa, it's a wake-up call for those who vote for the ANC. But I seriously doubt the National Executive Committee of the ANC, which is full of accused criminals, by the way, I seriously doubt that they will recognize the wake-up call. They'll continue to march and whistle past the cemetery and lead South Africa to ruin. And that is heartbreaking for me. I would really like to see a legitimate government that cares about South Africans, whoever it is. If it was the old ANC, I'd be fine with that. But they have betrayed South Africans, and that's my estimate. So I expect that the ANC will not get 50%, but it's likely they'll find a coalition partner or partners, most likely, and then we'll see a continuation of what's been going on. And it'll be just like what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay, where governments are upset, parliamentary process breaks down the government, it collapses because somebody wants to be the deputy, somebody wants to be the deputy minister, and then this portfolio and that portfolio for their blue light escorts and their hands on the travel money, and that's sad for South Africans. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the program and the panel once again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Let's have the final word from Ambassador Charles Ray. You have the final word.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute. Thank you for having me. I would agree with what, especially what Chris just said. I think, as I said, I think the ANC will lose and win at the same time, or I should say, will stay in power, but will continue to lose. And the real question is how long before they whistle past their last graveyard and they fall into their grave. And in the meantime, the people of South Africa continue to suffer. All we can do on this side of the Atlantic is to try and understand as best we can the dynamics of what's going on and realize that there's actually nothing outsiders can do to affect what's happening in South Africa. It's going to be up to the people of South Africa of someday, somehow, getting it together to find the right combination of people to lead the country in the direction it needs to go. Thank you very much for having me. It's been enlightening to hear some really outstanding perspectives on a country that I'm like Chris. I mean, I love South Africa. I never worked there, but I've visited it many times. And it's heartbreaking to see what it's become since 1994.
All right. Thank you very much. Right. So we at Sankofa take this opportunity to thank all of you coming around, sharing your perspective, knowledge, and experience on this program. We look forward to having you another time. Next week, we'll be discussing the elections, the upcoming elections in Ghana. Those of you who will be willing to join us, feel free to join us. But on this note, we come to the end of another Sankofa African series and say once more, thank you to our panelists for all their experience and their knowledge and their perspective on this program. On this note, we see you next week. Thank you.